Welcome, Ignacio. You have the floor.
Thank you. So physical and digital, the search for balance. First of all, a question. Are you a user of digital tools and do you think you're overusing them? This is an interesting question because in addiction, it's not always the same. For example, people who drink, the main question to know if they're actually overusing the fact of drinking is the amount, the factual amount of grams of alcohol that they drink every day. While, for example, in the case of smoking, it's not the amount, it's how early in the moment you smoke. Well, it turns out that with digital tools, it's none of this. It's how you feel. It has been researched that if you think that you overuse digital tools, it's much more likely that you're in fact overusing them. This is why this is an important question. And another one would be, what is the main source for you to overuse some digital tools? It can be several of them, but the thing is that the majority of us at some point we have realized, we have kind of had the intuition that we are overusing them. And in that regard, another question would be, have you ever tried to control the use of digital tools? And in the case of yes, what has been your main successful strategy? Maybe having a schedule for mail check, maybe uninstalling apps, maybe setting up screen time, whatever that was. That's something to be sure, and that is a bit of what we're going to talk about today. So if you think that you're overusing these tools, it's not by surprise. They're very well designed for this purpose. This has been researched in the last years, and now we know that things such as infinite scrolling or personalized news feeding, recommendation, they're intended, they have a very clear and stated intention to interrupt our offline life as much as possible. So there's an intention behind, and it seems like these tools have been quite successful at doing it. When you attend to this science article, that basically what shows us is that more and more people are actually afraid of being alone, left alone with their thoughts. Actually, in this study, in this exploration they did with people, they were able to prove how people would prefer small amounts of pain before being left alone with their own thoughts. So that's the kind of things that make us be aware of how much this problem is growing. The problem of what we could call the disengaged mind. Now, I am a neurologist by background, and so in medicine, when we have to check how the evidence, the scientific evidence is moving around a topic, we usually go to this website. It's called PubMed. And here we have the articles about everything that's going on in healthcare, in medicine. And so this is what I did. I typed digital overuse, and I tried to check how the trend is evolving along the years. And we can see how even when in the last years it has been growing, now in the last, let's say 3-4 years, it somehow stopped. And this is not proven. We don't know what's going to happen, but we kind of think we can infer something that when the amount of evidence stabilizes, it doesn't grow anymore, it sometimes means that we reached a peak, we realized about how big the problem is, and probably we can infer that things are going to start to happen with regards to changing policies and finding solutions, and the general audience, the general public being let's say awakened about this reality. So there is, in fact, a significant association between screen time and dissatisfaction with life. These are quite good articles with a big amount of population, and this is what they prove, that the factual time that we spend in front of our screens are very well correlated with how unhappy we are. And so this is probably not a surprise anymore, but the fact that it has been researched and that we now have the evidence to pivot around this idea is what probably pushes us to do something about it. In this regard, it's known for some years how Steve Jobs at home, when he got interviewed, he stated that at home there was no use of screens. So just reading books and talking, that's what he declared for his own family. And as a matter of fact, the Waldorf School at San Francisco has been an example of where, by the way, many executives from Silicon Valley are taking their children, and it has been an example of not allowing screens for a long time along the education period of these children, which already sends a signal that's probably something that is worth considering. Now, one thing that is absolutely important and key to understand about the reasons behind the use of screens, especially among teenagers, but not only among teenagers, also among adults, is that there is some fear of missing out. That idea that by not being connected all the time, there's something that we're missing, when in fact it's the offline life what we're missing. And this article that I reviewed was quite impactful in the sense that it declared how there is in fact a direct correlation between the number of accounts that we have, Facebook, Instagram, and so on, and the levels of anxiety and depression that people have. So there's probably a very obvious and direct recommendation behind this evidence that we're seeing more and more in the last years. And if you're wondering if these things that we call screens or devices are somehow affecting our mind, our brain, well, there is evidence also that it's not only the mind, but also the anatomy, the brain is being affected by these devices. We have this single article. We could show more, but it's just an idea that shows how the amygdala, striatal, is affected, is from the morphology point of view, changes depending on the use that we make. So it's a reality that we can somehow touch with our hands. Now, something important is that our tolerance to being bored has been decreasing more and more. And that is something that is worth considering, because something that has been researched is that being bored is in fact key, is in fact important for the development of our lives. In the moments where we are bored, there's something that happens in our mind where we stopped to do some autobiographical planning, we start having a personal narrative. It's where we realize about the kind of person that we've become, what we would like to do with our lives, what we're not doing, what should be next, what will be our goals, things that we regret. So all that narrative that starts, that only happens if we are bored. And the problem is that our mind is prepared in a way that if something happens that stops this process, then we don't have the opportunity to do it. And the problem with being connected the whole time to cell phones and to everything else is that we don't enter these processes anymore. Therefore, there is no narrative, there is no planning in what we want to do with our lives. So the effects are quite meaningful if we think about it. And something else is that it has been somehow misunderstood that the more connected people get, the more efficient they could get at work. But there's also some evidence, especially by the MIT in the last years, that this is not even true. How things such as creativity, teamwork, design get actually affected by the overuse of tools. So not even for companies, the productivity can be affected in a way that is counterproductive for the companies themselves. And there we also find a business reason to stop and to somehow reflect about this reality of what we call techno stress. So what could we do about this? Well, the thing is that there is not one recipe, there's not one single thing or one single formula, and the reason is probably that we didn't walk that way yet. We didn't go through that process of understanding what needs to be done. That's probably something that we will have in the coming years. 5 years, 10 years from now, we will have evidence about what can be done and what not. But here, only by talking about this today, we're being quite pioneers in trying to understand what can be done. That's why I was throwing this question at the beginning, where I was asking, what do you do? Because that is the benchmark, the practices of people that today tell us that they're trying and they're finding success or failure in trying to stop or to put a diet on screen time. But at least we have a few things, a few pieces of information. This is more than anything a joke, it's an anecdote, but in this company at 5 p.m. when the office hours finish, the tables and the chairs would go up to the ceiling automatically, and people just stand there and they cannot do anything but talk or maybe go home because there's nothing they can do with their work even if they want. So that's more than anything an anecdote, but it gives us an idea that something should be done. This is more likely to be implemented. This is something that I especially like, and I'm thinking about this for my own company. So in this company, if you're on holidays, on vacation, all the emails that you get, the person writing to you will get a mail that will say, the person you're trying to contact is on holidays, therefore this email is going to be deleted. That person will never receive it. If you want something, then write after this date when that person will come back. If it's an emergency, please write to this other person. But the thing is that when that person comes back, there's no accumulation of emails because that didn't happen during holidays. Quite fair if you think about it. And something else can be done. For example, the Washington Post was remarking how in Canada, there was an agreement by which Instagram was going to hide the likes. Now, if you think about it, how far have we gotten so that we have to get to this point where the Canadian government has taken the responsibility of removing the like button on the Instagram profiles of people so that they don't get too engaged or they don't get too much anxiety or depression or whatever other thing that these tools are causing on the users. And something else that is also interesting is looking at the difference between the Western world and the Eastern world regarding policies. So for example, in this article from Korea, we saw how already some years ago they analyzed the mandates that had been established by governments. And we saw how while in South Korea, China, Japan, there were many policies already in place, guidelines, population screening, so many things addressed to understand and control this problem, this problematic. We see how in the Western world, for now, almost anything has been done. And now it's starting, and that's why we're talking about this, but it's also remarkable how there's a gap between both worlds, between both cultures, with regards to understanding how big this issue is, and that something should be done about it. So if I had to choose one thing, one concept, one single idea, what I like is the concept of stopping cues. What is stopping cues? Well, in the physical world, there are stopping cues. There are situations where things come to an end. For example, you go and buy the newspaper. There's a moment where the newspaper comes to an end. There's no more newspaper. It's done, stopping cue. If you go having dinner with someone, the dinner at some points it stops. So it's stopping cue, end of dinner. And that applies to everything else. When you go to the movie theater, when you go driving, whatever you do in the physical world has an ending, has a moment in which it comes to a finish line. The problem with the digital world is that it doesn't have stopping cues. There's no stopping cues. So you're on sex, it's infinite sex. You're on talking to friends, it's infinite talking to friends. Video gaming, infinite. Whatever you're doing, messaging, looking at buying, working, whatever activity you get engaged in doesn't have to a stopping cue, and that is the problem because our minds are really not designed for this. So if there's one thing, it would be this. So for example, physically putting the cell phone out of the table in another room, in a different room, so that there's a cue is something that is worth considering, and the same applies to the rest of the world. There's simply no way of doing this sustainable if they don't set these cues by ourselves, because the tools are not going to do it for us, at least for now. So this all comes from experience and to experience, and I don't have the truth, but at least to finish, I wanted to share what has been my progressive journey on information diet. These are the things that I'm doing. I try to do something else every day, so no WhatsApp, phone only 12 hours per day, the other 12 hours, it's switched off. No phone at meals, email check only two times per day. No email in the phone, I know that's a hard one. No series, that's a tough one as well. Notifications disabled except Slack. No Tinder or other dating apps. No smartwatch, no iPad. Just one article or talk or video per week, no more. Sorry, one article and talk and video per week. no social networks, Twitter only professional, no phone during summer holidays. That's a very difficult one, socially very difficult to push, but I think that's a great one. Of course, trying to practice mindfulness somehow, no television. Day starts journaling, not checking email. And this is a new one for me, also a difficult one, no phone on Sunday. But the thing is that, like with everything else in life, you don't do these things from one day to another. It takes you some time. So it's always one step and then one step. So that would be my recommendation, just starting with one thing, consolidating it for, let's say, 3 months, and then moving on to the next thing. Because ultimately, we're all going in a direction. Digital tools are fantastic. They're incredible. They can help us a lot. I didn't talk about all the benefits because they're obvious. This is what we know. We're now talking about how we should control them so that we can keep using them in a healthy way. Because after all, if you think about it, life is what happens while you're busy looking at your phone, as John Lennon would have said. Thank you.